Hi everyone, welcome to week 10 lecture of ICT 200 Database Design and Development. This lecture is a recap of the concepts which we learned in week 3, week 4 and week 6. Let me share my screen and share and slides. Based on that, we will discuss the concepts. So, in this lecture, there are three concepts, as I said, data modeling, normalization, and ERD to database design conversion or transformation. Uh, and these three concepts were discussed in week 3, week 4, and week 6 of this subject. As I said, actually, in data modeling, there will be three main areas which we recap, we will rediscuss here. In normalization, there are a number of normal forms, but the first four, the first, second, third, and BCNF will be discussed. And then ERD to database design conversion. Let's move to before moving to data modeling concept, let me share with you that this lecture will be divided into three parts, and there will be three small videos of 20-25 minutes, which will be uploaded here. So you can take your time to view those videos of lectures. Let's start with the data modeling concept. And the data modeling, there are three main areas which will be discussed in this lecture. One is entities, second one is the relationship among entities, and third one is some different type of entities, associative, super, and subtype of entities. So let's start with entities. Entities are basically defined as if a place, person, object on which an organization is interested to maintain data. So entities are always represented with the help of attributes, and attributes are basically characteristic of that entity. And for example, in the left hand side in blue box, and there is entity called customer, and customer is represented with the customer number, customer name, street, etc., etc. These are the characteristics of that particular entity. There are two boxes given below, uh, and they are in orange color, and these two boxes are meant containing some of data. These two customer data are given here just to show how entities are represented. Uh, Second concept is attributes. As I said, actually, attribute represent characteristic of an entity, and that characteristic can be a name, or some other character like features of entity. In this particular example, in the bottom line is given that attribute of naming, name of the person, name of the place, individual, or it can be character of individual, height, color of the hair, etc., etc. So in attributes can be represented in this form. uh, you can see also the student is an entity, and student can be represented with the student id, student name, address, phone number, email, etc. In each entity, this particular slide is showing actually in each entity there is attribute called identifier, and identifier can be a single attribute or can be a combination of attributes. So in this particular case, the student entity is represented by identified by one attribute called student id. Student id is attribute which can identify each and every student individually. So every student is going to have individual, a unique or unique student id. That's the main concept of identifier. The second concept regarding in attributes are there could be required attribute or optional attribute. Student ID is identifier, that's required one, because for each student you need to have a unique number, unique identifier which can identify that student from in the database individually. But for example, some students may be having email and some may not be having email, so that becomes optional. In this particular list, you can say name is also essential. You can say required attribute. Date of birth is required, but email is not required attribute. Some students may be having, may not be having, and that's why when you are defining your entity and attributes, you need to mention that actually this particular attribute is optional. Attributes can have a single value or multi-value. If it is multi-value, it normally given in the bracket, curly bracket. You can see the contact phone is curly bracket, so one student can have more than one phone number, and that's represented here in the curly bracket. So that's a multi-valued attribute. But student ID, name, date of birth, they are a single value, so that will have only one value. Relationship now. So relationship are the best, or relationship is defined as an association between entities. So and you can see there are two entities here in left hand side, imply and skill, and they are correlated with each other. That association is called relationship. Similarly, you can see three entities are also getting associated. That's client, architect, and project, and that kind of relationship is called tertiary relationship. And the top one, employee and skill, where there are only two entities are associated with each other, are called binary relationship. So these are the two type of the relationship. There are third type of relationship is unary relationship. Only one entity is getting associated with each with itself. Uh, that will be discussed in the later stage. Relationship degree is defined uh, depending on how many entities are associating with each other. So in this particular case, student and course are given, they are associated with each other. So that's how they are. There are two numbers of entities, two entities are associating with each other, and they are called binary relationship, and that's degree. In previous slide we saw actually there were three entities associated with each other, so that's why it was called tertiary relationship, and that's degree of that particular relationship. Unary relationship is shown in the next slide. So unary relationship is like this. Entity is getting association with itself. For example, in a case of course, some courses requires prerequisite, and the prerequisite course is also coming from the same table, from the same database table. So that's why that table is that particular entity is having relationship with itself in terms of different rows. So one row is getting associated with the other row of the entity or table. So that is called unary relationship. Multi relationship between entities are represented in the form of uh, uh, showing actually two uh, showing actually how relationship are getting established. So for example, staff and department are associated with each other. So in this particular case, the one record of staff, how that record is associated with the department, and one department are having how many staffs. So that relationship is called multiple relationship between the entities. So each staff member belongs to one or only one department, and each department are having either zero staff or more staff, more than one, many. That is called multiple relationship among the entities. That is well defined and properly discussed in the following slides. So in this particular slide, you can see customer and order. These are the two entities having relationship with each other, and and two bars are shown actually here. That's outside, and these two bars are called minimum cardinality. Cardinality means there should be minimum one customer or should be minimum one order. That's the minimum relationship. Cardinality, normally inner cardinality, that is called the minimum cardinality, can be defined either 0 or 1. In this particular case, in in both side, in customer side and order side, is shown actually 1. So it means customer um, one customer can have one order at least, and one order should have at least one customer. So that's the minimum relationship or cardinality is given here. The maximum cardinality is shown in the next slide here in this slide, and that is shown the inner part of it, shown in the by the arrow. In At customer side, there is a maximum one customer can have order, and in the order side there is many. So it means shows that one customer can have many order, but one order can go to only one customer. So it means each customer can have many order or only one order, depends. So the maximum cardinality is shown by one or many um, arrows. So many arrows are shown actually in the order side. Uh, Cardinality can also be cardinality and relationship are defined with the symbols, and that symbols are called Croce foot notation. You can see the symbol of one mandatory, one to one relationship, mandatory, one to many relationship, that's mandatory and many, optional to one, and optional many relationship are shown, and they are indicated here in left hand side diagram. In the right hand side actually, the relationship are shown with diagram as well as with some explanation. You just see department has got a relationship with the employee, and that relationship is one to many. It means one department have many employees, but one employee can have zero department or no department. One to many relationship is given with the cardinality and minimum cardinality, particularly in the top, the original model. But um that is in Croce foot version, it is shown in a better ways. So department head has got minimum cardinality and maximum cardinality in both sides. So original diagram and Croce foot version has got some different presentation, and Croce foot version is quite detailed in terms of explaining relationship between the two entities. Uh, and that's how actually the bottom two diagrams imply any skill has got uh, representation of many to many relationship, and their cardinality 0 to many, and many to optional to mandatory, and mandatory to optional kind of a relationship is shown in the diagram here. Strong and weak entity are two different type of entities. One is a regular entity which are independent and can exist without association with any other entity. That is a strong entity. So, for example, student is a strong entity, course is another strong entity. For existence of course or student, it doesn't need any other entity. But the weak entity requires another entity to exist, and that relationship is quite important. So you can see in the right hand side diagram, building is quite important for the apartment entity. Apartment can be a part of a building, but without building, apartment cannot exist. So that's why apartment is a weak entity, and that is shown with the solid line between building and apartment. In under that situation, uh, the primary key of building entity should become a primary, the part of primary key of the apartment entity as well. Uh, Not only the foreign key, but also the part of primary key. That's why the weak entity are having a very strong relationship with the uh, with one entity to exist. Associative entity are applies when there are many to many relationship. So, for example, part and company has got many to many relationship. How it is said, actually, one part can be bought by many company, and one company can buy many parts. And under that situation, when it is many to many relationship, uh, a new entity is formed, that is called associative, or you can say associative or participative entity. That entity contains primary key of the both entity which are having association with each other. For example, part and company both are strong entity, and they are having association with each other. To associate them, there's associative entity quotation is created, and the quotation is getting primary key of part and primary key of company as as a part of the primary key of quotation. And both of these primary key of part and companies are working as a foreign key, but at the same time, combination of those foreign key become a primary key of the quotation. That's the associative entity. That's how the relationship between these two entities, part and company, are getting defined. um, the last part of this section is super entity and sub type entity. Super type entity is basically entity uh, which is having a strong relationship and exist um, alone, and they are independent. Particularly, the subtype are dependent on the supertype. So, for example, in this particular case, student is an entity, and the undergraduate and graduate are the other subtype entity which are dependent on the student. So, student can be defined into different uh, group or different categories of undergraduate or graduate. But for defining that one, certainly student is attribute, you can say entity, should exist. So the attributes, there are two types. First one is exclusive, and another is the inclusive subtype. Exclusive subtype is referred where the disjoint relationship, but when it comes to inclusive, it is very much dependent on the super type. So super type have uh, can have actually relationship with the all subtype. So for example, in the right hand side of the diagram, student can go to hiking club as well as they can go to the sailing club. So it means one student can have a membership with both. But in left hand side, you can see a student can either go to the undergraduate or graduate. They can't go in both. So that becomes the exclusive. The exclusive is very specific to one group. um, but inclusive can go to any group a number of times. Second thing, when it comes to the attributes, in left hand side you can see graduate and graduate has got at least some different attributes to identify that particular subtype. So undergraduate has got high school GPA and score on SAT, and graduate have got um, uh, different attributes. So undergraduate GPA, etc. So these attributes are defining them into different subtype, and they are called the discriminator. This discriminator defines students are going into two different subtypes. That's all in part A of the lecture. We'll get back to part B um, after a few minutes, and then we'll be having a different video on that. Thanks for listening.